Many people, especially women, believe that they have to choose between being likable and being powerful. But that is a false choice, and a dangerous one at that. You can be both powerful and likable. And to show us how, I invited Kate Mason. She's a former world champion debater and author of the fantastic book, Powerfully Likeable. And she offers a radical reframe. She says, the problem isn't you. The problem is the outdated rules of the game. And she shows us how we can play the game on our own terms without shrinking, softening, or staying silent. Enjoy. A lot of people, in particular women, believe there's a choice between being likable or being powerful. Is that a false choice?
It feels like, I think, to many of us that is the only two options, or those are the only two options available, right? That I could be high authority and low friends, or I could be high friends, comfortable with everybody, but very low authority. And I do think it's a false choice, but I think it's one that that took me some time to work out that to be the case. I think for many of us, it's not like there's a gun to our heads enforcing that choice, but I think culturally it can feel that way.
I can imagine. So why are you interested in this topic? What's your story?
My background is I worked in corporate communications for many years, but particularly, I guess this started being interesting to me when I was a teenager. I did a lot of debating when I was a teen, and I suppose more than other people, now I think about it, had a lot of feedback on my manner, right? From a very early age. Kate, you're being a little too much. You're a little too aggressive. You're a little too angry.
Too much. Yeah. Okay.
And I was always in teams with boys or young men, and they weren't getting the same feedback. And so I started to be at a pretty impressionable age, I guess, pretty aware of that dissonance or that difference between us. And so that has persisted throughout my whole career. And now as a coach, I work with women and men, but I suppose I have a particular soft spot for women who are articulating or trying to find language for that difference in themselves as well.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was obviously debating at school, presenting, etc. I was never given any feedback like that. It was more reinforcing. It's like, no, that's great. Speak up. That's all fantastic.
Bang your fist on the table.
Yeah, exactly. So is it fair to say this mainly concerns women, but not exclusively? Is that a fair assumption?
So the people that I find mostly who face this are for sure women, overwhelmingly. There are some men. And I would also say there's a really interesting subsection of gay men who sort of say, actually, I feel very similar. How do I step into authority when I'm known as the sort of likable, funny, affable person in the office? There's for sure a spectrum, but yes, I do think it does overwhelmingly affect women. And that's where I wrote my book, particularly in service of.
So what does it take to be both powerful and likable, which of course is what the whole book is about, Powerfully Likeable?
So part of it is understanding that we can bring together two or more, I suppose, seemingly dissonant values and embody them in our communication. So power and likability is the eye-catching one, I suppose, and why the title is as it is. But a lot of the book is really exploring, if we stopped thinking about this as only a choice of two options, if we opened up the menu, if you like, what are all the interesting other generative ways we could conceptualize ourselves and speak from? So could we be, ambitiously communal, for example, two things that don't feel like they should sit together? Could I be rationally warm? Could I be competitively collaborative? Right?
Competitively collaborative. I like that.
So what are these different ways? And oftentimes I find, particularly the women I work with, have felt really boxed in, or like these leadership definitions or communicative leadership definitions are really narrow. How can I widen them up to actually step into a sense of, actually, this is who I am? It's more of a sense of coming home to something rather than feeling like I have to be performatively different from who I actually am.
Interesting. So rather than buying into the North Star that has been given to us of being either powerful or likable, you say, no, you define your own. You decide what it is. And a good starting point would be to find two words or adjectives that describe your style.
Yeah, I have an exercise in the book where it's more like here's one category of words that may feel like more rational, incisive, assertive, ambitious, competitive, which many women don't wholly identify as one of them, right? I have very powerful, authoritative women say, I wouldn't call myself powerful or authoritative. And then I have another list of maybe more feminine coded attributes like empathy, communality, collaborativeness, warmth. And these are not necessarily coded for leadership or authority by themselves. But the exercise is, can you pick one of each that resonate with you? And what does that look like as a combination? And it's, I think, in that combination that I often find people are like, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly how I see myself. And so then it becomes a question of, instead of thinking, oh, how do I stand up in that difficult conversation, or how do I write that email, whatever the blocker might be, it's like, oh, well, hang on, could I summon my rationally warm self, for example, right? This is a self maybe that I identify with. What does that email look like? What does that conversation sound like? And that's often a really beautiful starting point for people to realize, oh, I could be, for example, really incisive and intelligent about something, but I could be warm at the same time, right? I don't have to be terse or aggressive or the things that maybe they were feeling like were dissonant to them or incongruous to them in some way.
It's so fascinating because we may feel that or think that being authentic is the easiest thing in the world, right? But what you're saying is we actually have to define it and practice it and then find our authenticity, because we've probably downloaded, in our head, there are probably 20 years worth of memes we downloaded from whoever was around us, whatever things we were taught when we were young.
Yes. And I think memes is such a great way to think about it. I think that's for a lot of women I work with. They've often been told or been given feedback early in their career, stop apologizing, or, be more confident, or soften your language. It's too much. Whatever they've been told, you often find people who are really holding on to feedback they've heard 10, 20 years ago. So it's sort of accreted over time such that they find it really hard to know, hang on, who am I in all of this? And I think, the best comfortable communication comes not from being performative and being something else. Like I could be a corporate robot, right? We've all got a potential to be a corporate robot, but it's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to feel good. And to your point, it's not going to feel authentic.
Not going to feel authentic. I think it often starts even the first few sentences when someone presents, and it's often like, oh, I'm so, thank you for taking the time. And, you have this whole waffle of 30 seconds that take away the attention, diminish the own position. I was, men and women, was trying to get them to move away from that very quickly to, we're here today to talk about this thing, and our objective today is to decide on this question.
Yes.
And then you go right in, right? But it takes a while for this. I have to thank everyone and have to be really diminutive in order to be allowed to speak in front of others. It's not helpful.
Yes. Well, and there's probably hundreds of years of acculturation on, particularly for women on that, right? That we equate likability with deference and being diminutive, as you say, or deferential at the start. Like, no worries if not, or I'm sure you've already thought of this, or
just my opinion.
Yeah, just my opinion. I wouldn't know. What would I know? Right. We take, and as you say, those first 30 seconds, honestly, sometimes take our legs out from under us before we've even got to the point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think another challenge is saying no, right? Without ticking people off. Yeah. That's a challenge for everyone, let's be clear, because we've all been raised to say yes or not and to be nice and to do what we're told. The whole school system is about it. In university, if you don't do what you're taught by your professors, then you're not going to graduate, etc. But in business, if you don't say no, most of the time, you're just going to drown in other people's priorities.
Right. And I think I have a lot of people who say to me, but I'm a people pleaser. And of course, being a people pleaser sounds nice, right? We want to naturally please the people around us. Like no one, I think, sets out to not be or to be difficult.
Yeah, you don't get up in the morning say, I want to not please people.
That's right.
I want to be totally egotistical today.
Exactly. No. But I think what we realize is you're going to have much better longer-term sustainable relationships and trusted relationships if you can actually be honest about certain things. I'm not going to be able to get that done by Friday, but what I can do instead is this, or I can get you that by Monday. Like just being really transparent and honest is probably a much more interesting way to think through those relationships rather than just the default to yes and then resenting it later.
Yeah. I think often people look for the right sentences, and those are important to have in the back of your head if someone asks you. But it's not hard, right? I can give you these sentences now. It's really about the mindset of, no, you're totally within your rights to say no to requests that don't fall under your priorities.
Yes. And I think if people, I'm sure you give this advice too, if people really do struggle with that in the moment or find that confronting, you can always just say, you know what, Oliver, let me think about that. I'd love to get back to you. Just give yourself a minute or so of breathing room. And that can be maybe a follow-up email. Maybe you pop by their desk later. There's so many options, but sometimes that's enough breathing room to then go away and reflect, what actually do I want to say yes to? And what would make me feel good to come back to that person with? And that can be kind of the training wheels, for getting comfortable with that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's always the sentence I refer back to, which is, I wish I could, but I can't.
Yes. Thanks so much for thinking of me is another lovely one, right? I'm so delighted by that. I would have loved to this is what I can do instead, right?
Yes, and I make it about me, not the other person or the request. Like, that's not a priority and you're not my priority. That's not a good way to respond, but to say, I'm afraid I'm a bit stretched thin at the moment. I have these my own projects going on, so I need to really focus on this.
Yes, absolutely.
What is the failure privilege?
So one of the things I've noticed in particular with women communications styles is the idea that we are very, very fearful of failure to the point that we might not, say, speak up in a meeting, put an idea forward, put our hand up for a promotion. There's a big sense of, but what if I fail? And I don't see that as often with my male clients. And certainly there's reasons for that I think are interesting and worthwhile, looking forward. But I think the idea of the failure privilege in the book that I really want to dig into is men often, I think, have a failure privilege, which means that they can fail and redeem themselves, that all is not lost. And in fact, sometimes their failures are worn as a badge of honor, right? Oh, I had 3 failed startups. Now I'm on to my 4th and I've just raised a ton of money, right?
Pie in my face story, but
absolutely.
I grew out of it.
Yeah. Look at this great hero's journey, and absolutely, yes. And that doesn't seem to happen as much for women. And we can certainly, look at 2% of all VC capital raised is given to women, right? So we know that there's disproportionate effects here. But that hero's journey, and I say the very masculine hero, right? It doesn't necessarily apply to women as in the same way. We see failure as oftentimes inability to be redeemed from that failure, or right? That failure might paint us forever, or at least for a long time. So I somewhat, cheekily say, we'll have true equity with men when we can fail as often as they do and recover, and move on. So it's a slightly depressing idea, but it's also, I hope that it's somewhat liberating as well, which is to say, these are the stakes. We know that they're out there, but we also know if you don't try and if you don't put your hand up or put your hand forward for that idea or that meeting, it's as good as not. You've conceded at the outset that you're never going to have a chance.
Yes. Failure is just table stakes, right?
Exactly.
It's the entrance ticket to being in the arena, absolutely.
Yes.
But it's easier said than done, right? It's easy to say, hey, just overcome your fear.
Completely.
Whether it's fear of failure or fear of public speaking, which affects most people, as we both know. What's your advice to someone who said, I hear you, Kate, but, I am fearful.
Yes.
I worry about standing up in these meetings and, presenting my ideas with power. What should I do about this?
Oh, there's so many things. I mean, one of them is to have a conversation with that fear, right? Which is to say, a lot of I have a chapter in the book where I talk about the fact that I think we often forget that we are animals, right? And sometimes we have a very animal response, which is saying, watch out, be careful, this is dangerous. We might hurt ourselves. And that's a beautiful response, right? If we ignore it and say, no, I've got to do it, I'm fine, we're probably going to stay at that high level of activation and anxiety. Sometimes saying, hey, what's going on? What are you trying to protect me from? And actually having a conversation with that voice. And that voice might say, well, this could be really embarrassing, right? Like you could forget your words up there and you can say, okay, that's a really valid point. So you can validate it. You say, well, here's what I've done to mitigate that. I've practiced, I've thought about it, I've researched, I've got some notes. Hear what the voice says next. The voice might say, yeah, but it still could go wrong. And you say, yeah, you're right. Still could, but really interrogate and listen. And I find those types of conversations, they sound a little bit woo-woo, but what they're doing is kind of defanging that voice, and you're in some way sort of helping that your cortisol or your adrenaline to come down in that moment, to say, hey, I hear you. Thanks for looking out for me, but I don't need to be activated in the way that you're telling me to. I believe this to be a safe environment. And even if it's not all safe, I believe I'm going to try anyway because I've prepared and I feel ready. That voice often dissipates in the face of that. it's like, okay, I got my point across. Whereas I think it gets louder and louder the more we ignore it or repress it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a 100% solution here. But I always think of this as trying to move from a state of fear to a state of trust, right?
Beautiful.
A state
Yes.
that where you trust in yourself that you can deliver that presentation, whatever it may be, but also trust it's going to be okay either way, right? Even if I screw up this presentation, I'll still be okay,
Yes.
right? The world's not going to end.
Yes.
Again, easier said than done, but just having these frameworks and these questions, these conversations with yourself ready often helps to alleviate that issue.
Yes, I love that fear from trust framework too. I think that's beautiful because, as you would well know as well, that it's a muscle. And so the more you're practicing it, the more you'll remember, oh, yes, I had trust the last time. I believe I can find it again.
You can believe it. That power memory to say,
Yes.
hey, I delivered that presentation to the board 3 months ago. I'm going to be fine here as well. I know how to do this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are you sick and tired of spending 8 hours preparing for a 1-hour presentation? You're not alone. That's why I created my tactical guide, 50 presentation hacks. It's for free. Grab it in the show notes. Is there a link between this and like fear and, as you call it, communicating while female and perfectionism?
Absolutely, there is. I often work with very type A, brilliant people, and I see in them I better do 40 hours of preparation for that speech because that's what I've done maybe to my career in this point, right? That I've always done it that way. And oftentimes I work with people who may be at an inflection point. Hang on, now I've got 8 of those presentations a day and I can no longer prepare 40 hours each, you know, and it's become unsustainable. But it's also, I'm afraid to let go because that's what's got me here, right? Like that's the pattern that I've always used. So what do I do?
Absolutely.
And I feel for them because I deeply empathize with that. So I talk a little bit about getting comfortable with preparation and not over preparation, because I think a lot of perfectionism can also come from, well, I will just be better at everything. I will know the answer to every possible question I could be asked, every variable. These people go into a meeting, I would say sometimes 400 or 500% more prepared than perhaps they needed to. And why that's important is that it's one, to your point about the world not ending if you do fumble a presentation, you can always say in a meeting, actually, that's a great question. I'm not sure of the answer. I'm going to come back to you this afternoon or later on, right? There's probably a matrix. The higher we go in an organization, the more senior, there's actually a little bit less expected of us knowing every single answer all the time, because it's expected that we have a wider purview or a remit across more things. So I'm trying to encourage a sense of flexibility or getting more comfortable with less preparation, which is not to say you shouldn't be prepared, but to be over prepared, I think carries a great cost, both in terms of our energy, but also being less flexible in the moment. Right? We've developed this one idea so deeply and we've researched it so much that if the meeting decides to be a little bit more organic and go in a different direction, we're often very loath to follow because we want to hang on tightly to the thing we've prepared.
Yes, I totally agree with you, because there is a cost, the cost in terms of time of over preparing, spending too much time. Maybe I, spent last night doing it instead of getting rest before the big presentation in the morning. Maybe I'm tired. And also what I observe is if you focus on every detail in the Q&A, you're probably losing sight of the key message and connecting with the audience. So often the presentation gets worse if you focus too much on the details. And it's better to zoom out, because the people in the room, probably they want the gist, right? They want the big picture. What's the key message here? The details, yes, that's important, but you can always, as you said, deliver them in the afternoon if you really don't know them.
Yes.
In terms of Q&A, I would just say, what are the 10 questions that are likely to come?
Yes.
Right? Just prepare the 10. Maybe you even want to include them in the presentation or your talk, so you already answered them. There's no need for the questions. But if you just approach it like that, my aim working with people is always half the prep time, but double the impact. And that's totally
lovely.
possible.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Last week, I was talking to a female COO, hundreds of people under her, but she said something revealing. Said, in the meeting with my superiors, I have to steal space. And I double clicked on that language. What's your thought on that?
I think that's a very common thought. I haven't heard that language exactly, but it's very evocative, isn't it? I think partly it can be that some communicators, male or female, aren't aware of how much they speak in a meeting. Like, I've taken up 90% of the air in this meeting. I'm someone who often thinks about who hasn't spoken in a room, or I'm thinking about that dynamic because it's my job, but many of us don't, right? You can also run into people who are external thinkers, so they actually think out loud rather than internally. I think for a lot of women, we think internally first before we want to say something, particularly in a room where there's a status or a power imbalance or a perceived one.
What would you say to that person?
Well, I'd firstly interrogate why she thinks she isn't welcome in that room, or what sort of signals she feels that she's receiving. Sometimes it's just, they kind of move on too quickly without me, or I tend to be slower to think of X, or I want to spend more time considering Y. Certainly, they also just may be more hostile types of environments, right? But I think I would say you're there because you were hired for a reason, right? I think many of us forget this, that we need your operations skills at that table, and you need to be able to represent them in a way that does justice to all the people who report to you. So in some ways, if you see yourself in service of representing that constituency, that can be a way in for people. There's some really brilliant research that we sort of hear that women are less good negotiators than men as like a cultural thing. But there's some really excellent negotiation research that says women are better negotiators when negotiating on behalf of somebody else. So if they are negotiating on someone of their team, hands down, they beat men, right? And so if you can skew that or use that to your own advantage, think, I'm actually in this role trying to be in service of someone or something, right? My organization, my team, my stakeholders, whomever. How can I go in and really advocate for them? And that I find often really changes. It's less about me and more about, I have an obligation or a duty to really surface these things. And it can be a very liberating framework for some who suddenly feel very energized by that, I think.
Interesting. So rather than thinking, I need to negotiate my pay rise, you say, I need to go negotiate a bigger family budget for, my kids, my family. That could be one way of approaching it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or, instead of feeling like, I, Kate, need to, quote, steal time. These are the 5 priorities from the ops team, right? And I want to make sure that I've got all of your buy-in because this is the direction our team's going in, and here's why I want to surface it, right? And that becomes, it becomes a little less kind of all about you, if that's something that you're struggling with.
What would you say is the toughest challenge women face in the workplace in terms of communications?
Oh my gosh, that's like asking... That's almost an impossible question. I think one of them is a chronic underestimation. And I think that can be really subtle. I had a really funny experience of this the other day. I ran into somebody who an acquaintance, and we were at a conference, and there was a big stage, like the main stage, and then there were these tiny smaller stages. And he said, so are you speaking on the small stage? Like, which small stage are you speaking on? And I said, actually, I'm speaking on the big stage. And he said, right. And he said, you have a book out. Are you self-published, right? I said, no, actually, it's from Penguin Random House. And like at every point, there was an underestimation. And this is not a bad person, right? Like he's a perfectly nice person. But I was marveling afterwards at like at every point, and I'm not saying either that he had to come and be like throwing me a parade, right? But it was curious to me that he didn't just start by saying, where are you speaking? Or tell me more about your book, right? There was just an inbuilt bias or underestimation. And I think a lot of my women clients say similar things where there's a slight bias that comes out without them having done anything or not done anything to really deserve that. And I can't help wondering if that would or wouldn't happen to a man in the same position.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I doubt it happens to men as much, certainly not in my experience. What I would say, I'm just throwing it out here, right? If someone said this to me, so you're speaking on the small stage, I would say, no, I'm speaking on the big stage. Do you speak on the small stage?
You're right.
I would look at him pretty intensively.
Right.
Basically saying, don't do this with me, right? Find someone else to bully around, not with me.
Yes. The other one I quite enjoy when you are a bit wrong-footed or you think I don't have a retort at the ready is just to say, that's an interesting thing to say out loud. And kind of just, nice. It's not a judgment. You're not commenting on what it is, but you just say, that's an interesting thing to say out loud. And then they sort of have to reflect on what it actually was that they've said. And you can smile and move on. It doesn't, It
doesn't matter
right.
at the end. Amazing. This is so good. Kate, so let's say someone listening says, great, I hear you, Kate, I want to do this. I want to be on this path to be powerfully likable. Where do I start?
So one of the things I do in the book is to say, let's drop a pin on the map, if you like, of where you currently are. Because a lot of us, to the underestimation point, I think underestimate the things we're already doing well. And I make a point of saying to people, if we're going to do an audit, of your communication style, or if I was working with you one-on-one, I'd be looking at, hang on, what are you already doing well? What lights you up? Where are the places in which we think, yes, there's something there. I really loved the way that felt. And really getting people to note that down, even keeping a diary of sorts over time, right? Oh, I had a great conversation or a meeting or a presentation. What were the conditions, of that? Was I with people I knew? Was I with strangers? Was I really well rehearsed? Was I spontaneous? Whatever it is for you. And to similarly do the same of where I feel like I might need some support, right? So you have a pretty nice inventory, if you like, or audit of these are the places I feel like I'm really sparking or spiking in, and these are the places I feel like I need a bit of support. And that exercise alone, I think, is a really good starting place to start thinking about how I want to be, right? Where's my aspirational kind of communicative self? And giving yourself a little bit of credit for the things that are already going well. And I think from there, it's then about understanding those areas that I want to feel a bit more buttressed or supported in. How might I go about learning to fill those gaps?
And what should we avoid to stay on this path?
My feeling is that we communicate the worst when we are feeling very far away from our actual self. So when the delta between real Kate and like my corporate persona is really wide, we're not probably doing a good job. So when we can come back, and certainly I see that when I'm running workshops, when I am mostly myself, which is I take my work very seriously. I don't take myself especially seriously. So I'm a little bit funny, a little bit wry, but I'm also, very focused on the work. That's when people start responding. They uncross their arms, their shoulders come down, they lean forward, right? And so what we're trying to get to is, can we make other people feel safe at baseline around us? And at the ceiling, can we make them energized and excited and really bought into what we're doing? I think that's a really nice place to aim for.
Absolutely. And the way I picture this in my mind right now is that you shouldn't wear a mask at work.
Yes.
You should just bring out certain aspects of your personality, right? Because that's normal. We bring some aspects forward in the family, some with friends, some at work.
Sure.
That's totally fine. But we shouldn't wear a mask, because at the end of the day, it doesn't serve us. You feel this discrepancy between the real me and that mask. And also people may not really respond to our communication because it's not true.
Yes. And we sense, again, we're animals. So we have a good sense of this. You can tell if someone's being deceitful or not telling you the whole truth, or, that there's a real visceral feeling, I think, that happens. And when you get that connection, on the other hand, it feels good and we trust it.
Yes, because if someone's wearing a mask and I sense this, it's hard to trust that person because I don't know who is behind this mask.
Exactly right. And you're probably right not to trust them. That's a good animal instinct.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's why this sort of small talk, the sort of let's go a beer, let's go for pizza, that's so important, because we can let our guard down a little bit. We can be more vulnerable, and vulnerability is a great gateway to authenticity and building true connections with people. And my feeling is that in this day and age, in the right kind of workplaces we all want to work in, this is how it should be, rather than the command and control, just nothing personal, nothing private, do as you're told. I think those organizations, they will face a pretty tough time going forward in the age of AI.
Yes.
And it's there where people trust each other, trust themselves. That's where organizations can move fast towards more innovation, to becoming and staying competitive.
I totally agree with you. I think companies that are remote only are finding that hard for exactly the reason you say, because, you can't grab a pizza. And sometimes I encourage folks, could you book a 30-minute cup of tea Zoom, where you just chat. And I'm like, it's a little bit artificial feeling and it's a little bit clunky at the beginning, but that type of thing might be, and again, your mileage will vary, but it might be a good way to just build up that rapport slowly, because I know Zoom only relationships can be challenging.
Would you therefore say it's good to meet at the office at least once or twice a week?
I mean, I'm very reticent to put numbers on those things because I don't really know the answer, but I certainly think companies that even even can have an offsite or bring folks together in person if they're, a distributed workforce or remote, can be so valuable, just so you have those shared memories and shared experiences, even if it's something silly like, oh, remember when we did that ridiculous trust building exercise that nobody liked? That sort of ironically built a lot of camaraderie with the team. So, yeah. We always have those, right?
Absolutely. Those are the funnest stories. And off to the hotel bar. What can people find out more about you, the book, your work?
Well, the book is called Powerfully Likeable. My website is katemason.co, and I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. So those are the usual places to find me.
What's your best piece of communications advice? Our traditional closing question.
Oh, that's like asking me to pick a favorite child. I think if you can channel your most calm self to be when you're in a high stakes situation, is probably a really easy way for you to build trust quickly and for you to help co-regulate whoever you're dealing with. So if you can manage to find your own space of calm, you can often de-escalate or defang somebody else who's coming at you aggressively or, in a high stakes sort of a moment. And I think people underestimate the power that can have.
Find your calm, confident self. And it's a skill as well, right?
Absolutely.
We can find it, but we also know how to bring it about.
Yes.
Any pointers for people, how you can find it?
Yeah, so sometimes it's physically regulating yourself. So if you know that you've got a really big meeting or you're anxious about something, go do something physically that is going to help take some of that adrenaline out for you. So go lift weights, go for a run, do some yoga, sing a song, sing in the way to work in the car if you drive, go for a run. If it's not possible and you're, just going from meeting to meeting and you're already in a workplace, think about, are you warm enough? Do you have a drink? Like, what are the little animal creature comforts that you can do to make you just more comfortable in the day? You'll probably find that your communication really benefits from that.
Yes, absolutely. Kate, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, it's a pleasure, Oliver. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the Speak Like a CEO channel. It means the world to me, and it helps us keep bringing you world-class insights and guests.